This is Hannibal here from thehannibaltv.com, and this is going to be my weekly Wrestling Observer review. Lots of comments already. Appreciate it. I'll jump right into it with the WWE news. I guess Nigel Mcguinness, who had been one of the 205 live commentators, was among the WWE releases. He had been on the NXT UK commentary team. They have not been doing any tapings since the lockdown. There has even been some talk that the NXT brand, who knows what's going to happen with the future of it. They stopped doing house shows a while ago. They've just been doing TV tapings. The plexiglass at ringside that WWE debuted this week very likely could be new to be permanent for WWE even when fans come back. The purpose of this would be to prevent fans from touching wrestlers, which I know for especially kids, one of the things that I liked when I was a kid going to the wrestling matches was if a wrestler gave me five or something on their way out to the ring. So that was like a big part of why I liked going to live events. I don't think I could have afforded tickets to a WWE live event if I was a kid nowadays for ringside tickets anyways, because they're so expensive. But when I was a kid, it was like 15 or 20 bucks for a ringside ticket. And as I said, it used to be cool to slap the wrestler's hand. So I think if they do make the plexiglass a permanent thing, that will really take away from the live event experience, particularly of the youngest audience. And the fans that were in attendance at the tapings this week are WWE Performance Center trainees and NXT talent. Wrestlers that aren't used as featured stars on TV, pretty much. Shad Gaspard had a memorial service on May the 22nd, about 15 feet from the area where his body washed up on Venice Beach. His death was one of the most talked about news stories last week. WWE didn't make any formal mention of him on Raw or SmackDown, but they did put up graphics for him for NXT, SmackDown, and Raw last week. Apparently, Vince McMahon, contrary to some reports that were circulating in recent weeks, is not going to buy the XFL out of bankruptcy court. However, there is about 20 potential buyers that are interested in buying the XFL. So that could be interesting if someone buys it from bankruptcy court and actually makes it successful after all the hundreds of millions of dollars that Vince has lost with it over the past, I guess, 20 years between the first and second incarnations of the company. Apparently, Kurt Angle is likely not operating under a new deal. He was one of the WWE releases, but as with all the wrestlers that were released by WWE, there is a 3-month no-compete period where WWE could still potentially use them. So using Kurt Angle on NXT this past week or this week, he refereed a cage match involving Matt Riddle, who is now moving on to SmackDown. That was likely just them still using Kurt while he's under a no-compete clause. If AEW did use him, I'm not sure really what they would do with him other than using him for referee roles or behind-the-scenes roles or commentary roles. Maybe another manager. They seem to be using a lot of ex-wrestlers as managers. They have a ridiculous amount of managers in AEW, but I don't know how much he could actually do to boost ratings for the company with his current physical limitations. AEW did score their highest rating in quite a while last week using Mike Tyson and a bunch of MMA stars on the show. They did a 0.32 rating, which beat NXT for the 28th time, I believe. NXT did a 0.19 rating, which was up from the 0.13 rating NXT did the previous week. Raw did its second all-time lowest viewership last week, 0.51 rating. Titan Games, which aired the same night as Raw, did a 0.7 rating. SmackDown last week did a 0.5 rating on Fox. Total Bellas did a 0.25 rating May 21st, which beat NXT. So Bellas almost pretty much always beats NXT and comes close to hitting the same ratings as AEW gets. As far as the AEW pay-per-view buys, they did bring in Mike Tyson for their pay-per-view, and obviously that did help. They seem to have had between 100 to 110 million pay-per-view purchases for the Double or Nothing pay-per-view that involved Mike Tyson. Sorry, 100 to 110,000 purchases for AEW Double or Nothing, 1,000, which is still great. And I don't know how much they paid Mike Tyson, but that likely equals, according to the Wrestling Observer, somewhere between 2.3 and 3 million in gross revenue for AEW. Of course, that doesn't include expenses or what they paid talent. But that was the biggest Dynamite audience also in over 3 months for Mike Tyson appearing on Dynamite. So his appearance obviously did make a huge difference. There is going to be a second AEW show on TNT starting soon. The angle that AEW did with Mike Tyson and Chris Jericho on Wednesday was basically an exact copy of the angle that Mike Tyson did with Steve Austin back in 1998. However, back in 1998, Mike Tyson was 22 years younger, and it did score a 4 rating back in 1998. So obviously, they're just recreating something that already happened there, but Tyson's still famous enough that it generates interest. New Japan announced that the directors of the company are going to take a pay cut of 15 to 95%, depending on the person, for the 5-month period between May of this year and September of this year. This is due to financial losses of not being able to run events. They are going to start running live events without a crowd soon. And as soon as the country of Japan allows wrestling events in front of crowds again, New Japan is likely going to start running in front of crowds. That's how they make their money. The Department of Homeland Security in the U.S. has declared that pro athletes, as well as their essential staff and dependents, are going to be exempt from travel restrictions that apply to normal citizens. This includes MLB and NHL players, as those type of sports are going to be starting up soon without crowds. This change in policy did not specifically mention pro wrestling or UFC fighters living outside of the U.S. However, it likely will end up including them due to the relationships that WWE owners like Vince McMahon and Dana White have with Donald Trump. There is a huge percentage of athletes living outside the U.S. for all major sports. The ruling did specifically mention, though, MLB, NBA, PGA, NHL, tennis, men and women's competitors. It also applies to not just the athletes, but their staff coming in from outside countries. The Jeff Jarrett lawsuit against Impact Wrestling over the Global Force Wrestling footage is scheduled to begin on June the 30th. This has to do with Impact using the GWF name and footage that GWF recorded in Las Vegas prior to Impact and Jeff Jarrett having a falling out. Apparently, Impact has lost the tapes and footage that Jeff Jarrett had given them from the GWF. As I previously stated, I have no idea why Impact even got into that situation with Global Force Wrestling. I don't think it had any benefit to Impact because Global Force Wrestling was never really a known entity. They didn't have their own TV show. They basically just did some TV tapings. The whole thing was ridiculous. But the fact that Impact is saying that they've lost the tapes from Global Force Wrestling is a little weird. But I have known Impact to not be a trustworthy company. They have not been trustworthy in my personal dealings with them. In the UFC and MMA news, Anderson Silva and Conor McGregor, are trying to push the idea of having a fight. Silva is 45, McGregor is 31, so Silva would have a size advantage, but McGregor would have a big age advantage. UFC is going to start even stricter COVID-19 testing as time goes on. They are planning a show tomorrow night in Las Vegas. The Nevada State Athletic Commission has approved the show. There isn't going to be any training at the Performance Center, UFC Performance Center this week. They have an amazing performance center, which is located in the same area where their Apex facility is, where they're going to be taping all UFC events for the immediate future in Nevada. And if you want to see a tour that UFC Hall of Famer gave me of the UFC Performance Center in Las Vegas, search up the Hannibal TV UFC Performance Center tour on this channel. It's an amazing facility. They're also going to run on June the 6th at the Performance Center's Apex Arena, which is supposedly like $100 million facility inside this UFC training center. I don't think it was completed when I had my tour there a few years ago. Dana White says the first shows on UFC Fight Island, that is rumored to be in Abu Dhabi, are going to take place in June, with probably 4 consecutive shows taking place. Dana White's actually going to stay on this Fight Island for like a month, is what he's saying. They are attempting to trademark the term Fight Island for merchandising rights. Henry Cejudo, who appeared on AEW Dynamite with Mike Tyson this week, has been stripped of the bantamweight title after saying he's going to retire. UFC has not announced the plans to find a new title holder, but apparently Peter Yan is expected to be one of the fighters fighting for the title, possibly against Jose Aldo. Sarah Logan, former WWE star, she was recently released, and she's apparently training for MMA now. Damon Fieldman's bare knuckle fighting promotion claims they've offered Mike Tyson $20 million for a fight against Vanderlei Silva. So that would be under bare knuckle boxing rules. I doubt Tyson would accept a bare knuckle boxing fight. The chances of breaking your fists or having severe face trauma, I don't think is worth $20 million, when he could probably get a $20 million payday from an exhibition boxing match. We've heard talk of Tyson versus Shamrock, Tyson versus Tito Ortiz, even Tyson versus Tyson Fury in exhibition boxing matches, as well as Tyson versus Holyfield. So there's lots of offers out there for Mike Tyson to fight in bare knuckle boxing rules. That's the extent of the Observer this week. Not a huge amount of news. A lot of it had to do with that female Japanese wrestler's death, suicide, Hana Kimura, which I've covered extensively already on this channel. So I'm not going to get much more into that. Matt R says he's from the beautiful city of Baltimore. Donald, DJ, living the quarantine dream. Gyms are still not open here where I am in Canada. They're saying in July. Double S says, let's go. He also says when he was a kid, he danced in the ring with Junkyard Dog when he was about 7. Alan Kesselman says AEW has too much silly stuff on their shows. I agree with that. That's kind of what turned me off of AEW. Lots of conversation with you guys on here. Matt R says, will Piper ever start a YouTube channel? No. She does have an Instagram account, though. Mathis Bofetti says, interview Jamie Dundee or Eddie Sharkey. Maybe if I get out to Minnesota when the lockdown ends, if the riots ever end in Minnesota, maybe I'll add Mike or Eddie Sharkey to my interview list. Cody Hale says, when is Mike Tyson doing the exhibition fights? Hasn't been announced yet. He's getting a lot of offers, as I just mentioned. I'm sure he'll take the best offer. Apparently, they might want to do it in Saudi Arabia. If they did the Mike Tyson exhibition fight in Saudi Arabia, he could probably avoid testing that North American commissions would make him do, because we know he's a big pot smoker. And probably, I mean, I don't know if he is or not, but with the physique he has right now, it's more than likely he's on at least testosterone therapy. Big Brother Thunder, do I think Billy Jack Haynes put the boys on the tracks? No, I don't. I think he suffers from CTE. He was involved in the CTE lawsuit. I don't buy that story. I don't think he's making it up. I think the CTE causes him issues with his brain where somehow he has convinced himself that he was involved with that. Malafe says Henry Cejudo is the UFC midget, the UFC midget division champion. Yes. Well, he did retire, so he's not anymore. Do I think at his size, we saw him appear for AEW last week, and like his mainstream notoriety, would he make any difference if AEW picked him up? I really don't think so, because a lot of fans even commented they don't even know who he is. Like a lot of wrestling fans didn't even know who he was walking to the ring with Mike Tyson. Eric Zamudo says they should do a dark side of the ring about the Kurt Angle, Daniel Puder. They should do a dark side of the ring about all of Kurt Angle's brushes with the law and all of his family's brushes with the law. As sad as it is, and the crap that happened with his wife leaving him for Jeff Jarrett, and the downfall of Kurt Angle over the years, that would be a crazy dark side of the ring. Bible reading said, did Vince ruin wrestling forever? No. No, because other companies could have put out better products, but none of them really did. MLW probably has the most legit wrestling product these days, but I've given up on watching it as a fan. I will follow the news, as I've stated on here, and I will report on it. Latrano says he likes it. I'm covering combat sports other than wrestling. Did I see Zack Ryder gave his number out on Instagram? Mitch Wooten says, no, I did not. I do not follow him on Instagram, nor do I feel like calling him. DVSMY Cases interview Greg Gagne. I've said he's on my list. Andrew Lane, what are my thoughts on Will Ospreay? I've never watched him wrestle. As I've stated on here, I'm not really a fan of the smaller wrestlers or the gymnastics continuous high spot style of wrestling. Eric Zamudio says wrestling was ruined when WCW was gone. I think probably that around that time is truly when it really took a nosedive. Yes, social media it's helped it in some ways as far as if it wasn't for social media, I wouldn't have this channel, and this channel is supporting me during this lockdown right now, thanks to all the fans that watch my videos, as well as the fans that support me at patreon.com/thehannibaltv. My latest interview with Road Warrior Animal and Dan Severin that I conducted yesterday are already up there in full ad free. Working on some more for next week. Media Palace says they need a Dynamite Kid, Dark Side of the Ring. Well, if they do a season 3, that would be an excellent topic. Did I ever meet Ken Patera in your head? Changed Man said, no, I have not. He was supposed to be at the Pro Wrestling Hall of Fame in Iowa that I attended a few years ago, but there's some controversy whether he was there or not. Some people say he actually arrived in Waterloo but was in no condition to appear, and some have denied that he ever actually even came to Iowa. So I never got the chance to meet him, but he would be on my interview list. Woody Eyeball says, hope everyone's mental health is good. Mine personally is doing all right, but I'd feel a lot better if this lockdown was over. Tomorrow, by the way, I'm getting my skin cancer small little mark cut off, but I'm paying for it at a private clinic in Quebec because the Ontario medical system has turned their back on me. They only care about people that have COVID-19 right now, basically telling everyone else with other medical issues to go to hell. So we're supposed to have free Medicare in Canada, but I'm having to pay to have a cancer spot removed because I don't want it to grow or multiply while I'm waiting around for the cancer doctors to get back to work here in Ontario. Malafay tipped me $2. Says Cody Hall interview. What's my opinion of him? I don't even know where he is right now. Last I heard, he was at a dojo in Japan training, I believe Pro Wrestling Noah's dojo. I don't know anything about Cody Hall other than he's Scott Hall's son. If I ever ran into him, would I interview him? Yeah. Why not? 86 Calm Geek. What was my worst fan encounter? I won't even get into it on here because it was a person that became obsessed and not a restraining order, but it's called a peace bond here in Canada, had to come into play. And it involved courts and the legal system, and it was terrible. But in case by some chance that individual is still watching these videos, I don't want to somehow aggravate them. And as far as like just being attacked by fans, I have been attacked a couple of times by fans at events. Not in the last 10 years, though. Some people, there was one match with Abdullah the Butcher where some people claim that, I personally attacked a fan, but what the people didn't see was the fan in the crowd that day spit on me. So that's why I threw them, because I don't like getting spit on. And what happened there was then the whole crowd thought I was going to start attacking them. And what happened was they all grabbed chairs and stuff and thought that they were going to have to protect themselves from me. But obviously, no. It was just one person that I had the issue with, and we managed to calm down that situation. Wolfpack, For Life 3, who's the toughest person I know in indie wrestling? That's a tough one. I'm sure there's a lot of tough indie wrestlers out there. One guy who isn't an indie wrestler anymore, but that I would say is tough is what's his name? He just got signed by NXT. I interviewed him at the PCW Ultra show just before he was signed. What's his name? Oh, Killer Cross. I forget his NXT name, but he seems, from his bodyguard work and the type of training he tells me he does and the warm-up that I saw him do backstage, I believe he knows what he's doing out there. I don't know how many fights Davey Boy Smith Jr. has been in, how many actual street fights, or how many actual... I know he did win the Billy Robinson catch wrestling tournament, but he definitely trains. He's Davey Boy Smith Jr. has been training and fighting with top fighters for years. So although I don't know how much actual competition experience he's had, just from the sheer legends he's trained with and his technical ability matched with his strength, I would say he's one of the toughest, if you want to call him an independent, even though he's signed with MLW. Stan Cormier, what was my finishing move? It was a tilt-a-whirl powerbomb. I called the sacrifice powerbomb. Nobody ever kicked out of it. Double S says New Japan stopped using Cody Hall because of his attitude. Well, as I said, I don't know anything about Cody Hall, so I can't comment on that. The only thing I know about Cody Hall is that he's Scott Hall's son, and I'm surprised at his size. AEW or WWE didn't pick him up, since Scott Hall has such a good relationship with WWE. Fritzy Red says Killer Cross's name on NXT is Karrion Kross. Thank you for the reminder. And Chris Lee says his girlfriend or wife, Scarlett, is going to be a megastar. Gerald Parker says he's starting to watch my interview with Jerry Jarrett. Very interesting. My Jerry Jarrett interview was my longest ever interview, over 4 hours. And people can say what they want about him. He's a very nice guy, and he didn't rush through that interview. He gave me 4 hours, and he even did a follow-up phone interview after that. But really nice guy. Justin Booth, would I be willing to interview Jim Cornette? I get this question every single day. Yes, I've asked him 3 times. He said no 3 times. I would suggest, if people want to see it, tweet him on Twitter to do an interview with the Hannibal TV. Maybe if he gets hundreds of those tweets, he'll change his mind. By the way, I am doing an interview on Skype with Al Snow next week, so I'm looking forward to that. He's one of my most popular shoot interviews. Max Zorin 2099. Do I think I would have been friendly with the Clique if I were in the WWE locker room in the 90s? Well, I would. I have met Kevin Nash on numerous occasions, and we do get along. I actually really like Kevin Nash. Only met Scott Hall once. He was cool to me. X-Pac and I kind of became, we only met once, but it seemed like we had personalities that meshed. I think I would have been more with the Clique for sure than for instance, I don't know if I would have been friends with with Hardcore Holly, who was one of the people that the Clique didn't like, supposedly. So I would say, who knows? Who knows? I was friends, as I said, I may have had good experience with those guys in these recent years, but I wasn't in competition with them. When you're in competition with people, like everyone backstage in WWE is in competition with each other. And if they see you as threats, they could go after you. But I'd like to think I would have been on good terms with them. And especially in my younger days when I was a partier, I've never been a pill partier, but I'm sure I would have been hanging out at the clubs with them. Gerald Parker says, why do people always ask about Cornette? I don't know. He's got a good following online, I guess. JC1993, how is Rico doing? Well, yeah, I did that interview with him last year. Haven't heard from him since, although he did tell me to reach out to him next time I would go to Las Vegas and do a full shoot interview with him. So I am supposed to go to the Cauliflower Alley Club in September in Vegas, unless the border is still closed by then. I pray that it's not. So I will try and catch up with him. Then Michael B says he agrees on The Undertaker. Maybe he's talking about my reviews of the Undertaker documentary. Mike F says, ever tried to get a Sunny interview? No, I haven't. We did use her in Great North Wrestling for 2 shows. Maybe I would. Motor Stash, would I get an X-Pac interview? I don't know, because there's a lot of X-Pac interviews online. And as I said, I'm living off of YouTube right now because my job is closed. I don't know if I'd want to spend money on really expensive shoot interviews where the people already have a ton of interviews online, because I need to I can't waste money right now because I need to actually survive off of YouTube. But it's possible for the future I would interview X-Pac. Wolfpack for Life 3. Favorite tag team partner? Well, I was tag team partners with Samoa Joe only once, but I like Samoa Joe as a person, so I would say Samoa Joe was my favorite tag team partner. I was a successful tag team wrestler in Puerto Rico, 2-time WWC tag team champions with Monster Pain, who was known as Black Pain back then. He was in the WWE developmental for a while. If you ask me, they should have hired us as a tag team because I was the bumper of the team. He was actually bigger than me. If you don't know who Monster Pain is, he's like a 6'6", 350-pound big black guy that was just a monster. But he couldn't bump and feed comebacks like I could. So I think if they'd actually hired us both for WWE, it would have helped, because I know when he was hired, he didn't speak English very well. I'm sure that hurt him. So I think that would have been a good WWE team. Me and Cedric Rougeau, Jacques' son, would also have been a great WWE team, especially if Jacques had managed us. But for some reason, they weren't interested in doing that. That's another case where Cedric is like the ladies' man, and he's, again, 6'6", 6'7", but he doesn't necessarily have the bumping ability or the wrestling ability, but I could have made up for that. And Jacques managing us would have been pretty great. Justin Beck says, congrats to Becky Lynch. The Everlasting Peep Show. Do I believe Jim Cornette's followers would harm Vince Russo? There's crazy people out there. I get threats on here like on a regular basis. At least I've had some very serious threats online by people, and I know Jim Cornette has a lot of followers, huge amount of followers, and people that really love him. And you'd have to think some of those people would definitely be nuts, just from the percentage. Some of them have to be nuts. And with Cornette constantly bashing Russo, saying what a piece of crap he is, so forth, you'd have to think that, yes, probably some of the super Jim Cornette's fans would would hurt Vince Russo for sure. And Vince Russo is not a fighter. Wolfpack for Life 3, thoughts on New Jack. Haven't seen much of him. Don't know how much of what he's done is a work or a shoot. So no real. He was polite to me the one time I met him, and I asked him for a shoot interview. He's out of my price range right now, but he was polite to me when I asked him for that. So as far as my own personal dealings with him, haven't had any bad dealings with him. Matt R., what's going on with Rougeau's son now? His son, Cedric, that's the 6'7" son, works at a car dealership, I think is a car salesman. His other son that probably had potential, Jean-Jacques, he can do flips and all kinds of high-flying stuff. He's from what I understand, he lives in British Columbia and works in the forestry industry. He's really like a forest type of guy. Now, I think Cedric would have done better than Jean-Jacques just because Cedric, like, as I've said, I said on this before, he's one of the top ladies' man I've ever seen in my life. And he has like movie star good looks. And he has the Rougeau last name. And the Rougeau last name is still the most famous last name in the history of Quebec wrestling. Vachon's probably second. But the fact that Quebec doesn't have a real star, I mean, some people will say Kevin Owens, but the Kevin Owens name is nothing compared to the Jacques Rougeau name in Quebec. The Rougeau history in Quebec is huge, so it's unfortunate that WWE never gave his son a chance. It's funny that they gave Cedric a tryout, but they said he didn't have enough experience, but they hire so many people with zero experience and nowhere near the look of Cedric or the last name of Cedric. So it's funny that some people that have shitty looks, they'll give contracts, but a guy like Cedric, they didn't give a chance to. So who knows? Michael XV, do I have upcoming full shoots in the work? Yes. Bible reading, thoughts on the Iron Sheik? No real thoughts on him. I'm glad he's out of his serious drug use years. Wolfpack for Life 3. Is Terry Funk and I cool? Yes. Would I ever interview Dory? There is a seminar at the Cauliflower Alley. It's an hour-long interview someone else did with Dory that I put on this channel. But when I talked to Dory's wife, does all the business dealings for Dory, and the amount they wanted for a shoot interview with Dory is just a huge dollar amount, like one of the highest pays for an interview I've ever received. And if you look at the clips and the seminar footage I have of Dory on this channel, it doesn't have that many hits. So to just pay that kind of money when I know it wouldn't make the money back, I don't know. But I don't have any issues with Dory. Terry Funk, he'd be a better interview than Dory. Frizzy Red, what's my favorite boxing match? None really stand out, but I am a fan of George Foreman. I like watching him. And Tommy Morrison. The Morrison versus Foreman fight is maybe one of my favorites, but I really like Tommy Morrison. Justin Booth, which current pro wrestling company has the most credible heavyweight champion? God, I don't even know. I would say that the IWGP title is the most protected world title, but I don't even know who the IWGP champion is right now. But that title is the most protected world title. They haven't let the value drop, but they have had some champions that I don't really find as that credible. So I don't know. To me, I don't think there is, I guess, the most credible champion. I don't even know who the WWE champions are right now. I think Drew McDonald is one of them. I don't know who the other one is. They shouldn't have more than 2 in WWE. It gets really confusing. Fizzy Red says Tommy Morrison had a devastated left hook. Cosmo Torello, what was my favorite Randy Savage match? I would have to say the WrestleMania 8 match between Savage and Ric Flair was my favorite because the build-up to that was good. And at that point in time, I hated Ric Flair and I loved Macho Man Randy Savage. And I remember, some of you my age might remember this, my parents would never let me buy the pay-per-views. I'd have to wait till either a friend that had bought the pay-per-view and given me the tape or to literally rent them in a video store for people that remember video stores. So in those days, if you had pay-per-view or you had a TV, you could listen to the pay-per-views. Like it wouldn't show the actual pay-per-view. It would be like a fuzzy screen, but the screen would be in black and white, and maybe every 10 seconds a flash of like the action in black and white would appear, but you could hear the commentators calling the matches. And I remember my parents would get, for whatever reason, they're a bit of assholes, I would say. They would get so mad at me when I would listen to the pay-per-views. Because I was such a wrestling fan, I would listen to the announcers, but for some reason they thought it was ridiculous, so they would make me turn it off. But I remember listening to the Ric Flair Randy Savage match on my TV, and I was so into it. I wanted Macho Man to win so badly. I remember praying. I was praying that whole week that Macho Man would beat Ric Flair. I remember I was into that match like crazy. And then when I saw it, when it came out on VHS, I thought it was a great match. So I would say that the Flair Savage match was my favorite match, even though Ric Flair will never say that was one of his greatest. But if you look at, yes, the Flair Steamboat matches were pretty entertaining, but the build-up really never had me. Like I never really, for some reason, I always found Ricky Steamboat boring. Yes, he's a good technician, but like I was never like, oh God, can't wait to see this Ricky Steamboat match. I could never get excited about a Ricky Steamboat match. Whose side am I on the Montreal Screwjob? I am on Vince's side on the Montreal Screwjob. Brett was making good money. He was going on to make $2.5 million a year in WCW. Didn't want to drop the title. What choice do you have? Could it have been a work? Very good chance it could have been a work, yes. And I know Dave Meltzer insists that it wasn't a work, but you could work Dave Meltzer, and Bret Hart is the type that I think would also work Meltzer. Do I watch soccer? J Bab says no. I pretty much only watch boxing, wrestling, MMA. I will watch Sports Center and like watch the highlights of all sports. But I don't really follow too many. Baseball a little bit, football a little bit, but like I don't have the attention span to sit through a lot of sports. Matt R says, yes, I would rent the VHS of the pay-per-view. He never would rewind. Ha ha ha. Have I ever eaten at Sal's in Winnipeg? Mort Goldberg Talent says no. I've only, like, I wrestled in Winnipeg amateur wrestling matches. So no, on those days, I pretty much just do the tournament, fly out. I've driven through Winnipeg a few times, never really spent much time in Winnipeg. Well, I'll ask one more. Did I like the AWA? Yes, I did. Chris Lee says Savage and Flair promos at their peak, too. It was pure gold. I agree. Carlos Gambino, hey, just subscribe. Love your stuff. Watching from Ireland. Thank you. Kengo90 says top channel. Fair play, lad. Thank you. Wolfpack Lifts 3. What's the worst interview I ever did? I've answered this a few times. I guess Juventud Guerrera was my most unenjoyable because I didn't like him as a person or I didn't like his interview. But from the actual interview standpoint, maybe Carlito did a slightly worse interview, but he was a nicer person than Juventud. Mad Hop 88. Have I ever fought Moose? No, but I'll tell you guys a story. I'll end it at this story. This is my experience with Moose. I did meet him at the Impact match I did a few years ago. But back in 2014, I literally just a week earlier had my return match to wrestling. So I'd had one match, but I managed to get accepted into like a combined Ring of Honor, New Japan tryout thing that I drove. I forget where in Pennsylvania their school was. This was the tryout that Moose got signed from by Ring of Honor because he was in Ring of Honor before Impact. But I had a weird experience. I drove all the way down to their school in Pennsylvania because at the time I wanted to be in New Japan. Still do. I still would. But what happened was they gave me a match. I'm not even going to say this guy's name. I don't have much respect for him. He used to be in WWE for a short period of time. Couldn't cut it there. But they gave me a match against a guy that literally quit the match after 30 seconds. We locked up. I think I hit him on the back once. He rolled out of the ring as if to say he quit the match. And I looked at the judges and the people that were scouting the match, and I'm like, what do I do? And the ref is looking like, what do I do? Because he didn't want any more of the match. And the judges, I think it was Tiger Hattori actually, said, count him out. So they literally counted this guy out. And then they're like, match is over. So there was like either 40 or 60 people trying out. That was my chance to have a match in front of the New Japan and Ring of Honor judges. And they already went overtime because they accepted too many people in this tryout. And that was the extent of my tryout. Got in the ring, lock up, hit the guy on the back. He rolls out of the ring, refuses to get back in. They counted him out. Referee raises my hand. And this is the part. I was standing next to Moose. We just happened to be like, I guess I was talking to him a bit because we were both big guys. I guess we naturally just stood beside each other. So I remember I rolled out of the ring. He was still waiting for his match. And he's like, that's absolute bullshit, man. There's nothing in there that was any way dangerous. And then at the end, after everyone had finished their matches, Delirious was in the ring. Delirious is like the Ring of Honor booker. And he made a point of saying, I did not see anything dangerous in any of the matches that happened today. And he said that in front of everybody. And I believe he said that specifically because the guy rolled out of the ring because he was, I guess, too much of a pussy to have like a stiff match. Because where I come from, where I was trained in the dungeon, if you're hitting someone on the back in a safe place, hit them as hard as you can. So that was like my one experience that stands out with Moose. I think he's a nice guy. I think he will still have a brighter – I don't think he's hit his peak in wrestling, but I remember that he was one of the people that turned to me and said that was bullshit because they didn't give me another chance. And it's like I drove all the way from Canada for that tryout just to have some guy roll out of the ring. So that was disappointing. So I'm going to end it at that.